Night had already fallen when I found myself seated on the couch, staring blankly at the letter I had discovered in my mailbox. The soft cushions beneath me felt as hard as concrete, likely due to the tension knotting my muscles. The letter, from my grandfather, with whom I'd long lost contact, was a mystery wrapped in an envelope. Despite an internal warning screaming not to, my hand clenched it tightly. Finally, unable to bear the suspense, I rose, placed the letter on the table, and drifted towards the kitchen for a drink. The refrigerator, when opened, presented a barren landscape, save for a couple of beer cans. A mental note to go grocery shopping flashed through my mind. Grabbing a can, I popped it open, the hiss breaking the eerie silence. I gulped it down in one go, relishing the brief escape it offered. Grabbing the second can, I wandered back to the living room. The house was well lit, but a chilling dread washed over me. The letter's potential revelations haunted me. I set the beer on my newly purchased coffee table and, with a deep breath, tore open the envelope. The letter was brief, an invitation from my grandfather to his remote country house for his 80th birthday. And that was it. No queries, no warm wishes, just a dry invitation. I read it again, searching for hidden messages, before crumpling it up and tossing it in the bin. Sinking back into the couch, I sighed heavily, lost in thought. Why now? What did my grandfather want from me? Was this a final reconciliation, or something more? He was wealthy, but his money meant nothing to me. Outside, the rain began to patter against the window, echoing my melancholy mood. Rising, I picked up a photo from the table. A young boy and a woman, mother and son, their faces radiating happiness. Suddenly, the phone rang, jolting me. It was John, my friend, and the only close person I had left since my father's recent passing. We worked together at the local factory. "Hello. Hey, John," I greeted. "David," he shouted, his voice bubbling with cheer. "How's my buddy? Miss me? We haven't seen each other for a day. Guess what? Sarah from Demi's Diner wants to hang out tonight. She's bringing a friend. Interested?" "Wait," I interjected, trying to halt his verbal barrage. "Maybe some other time." I shared the details of the letter. John listened intently and said he'd come over soon. True to his word, he arrived 10 minutes later, bearing beer. Handing me a can, he sat down eagerly, urging me to spill the details. "So, you've got a maternal grandfather you barely know, and he suddenly invites you over. And he's incredibly rich?" John summarized. I nodded, and his excitement was palpable. "Think about it, bro. Get on his good side, inherit his fortune, and say goodbye to our lousy factory jobs." His eyes sparkled with the prospect. While it was easy for John to say, he didn't know my grandfather. Yet, the curiosity was gnawing at me. I decided to go. We spent a couple more hours discussing over beers, agreeing to leave the day after tomorrow. As John left, I headed to bed, the day's peculiar turn of events swirling in my mind, a mix of apprehension and intrigue lacing my thoughts. The night was restless, filled with strange dreams and a lingering sense of unease. The morning was still shrouded in darkness when John arrived. We had agreed to take his vehicle, a battered old Ford pickup that had seen better days. The day before, we'd managed to get a couple of days off from our boss, who, after a knowing look, had reluctantly agreed. We were good workers, never caused any trouble, so he was willing to accommodate our request. Our luggage was minimal. We packed a suitcase with some carefully chosen suits, grabbed a few snacks for the road, and a couple of cans of cola. Our destination was the neighboring state, a journey long enough to require stops along the way for necessities. It was early morning, the neighborhood still asleep, as I yawned and tossed the suitcase into the back seat. After a quick check to ensure I hadn't left anything on, I locked up the house and slid into the passenger seat. The truck roared to life, its sound amplified by a special muffler John had installed to mimic the rumble of a big rig. I glanced around guiltily, certain we had awakened the entire block. John hit the gas, and we were off. As we merged onto the highway, I rolled down the window, letting in a cool, gentle breeze. We rode in silence, both of us too groggy for conversation. My thoughts drifted towards the upcoming encounter with my grandfather. Memories of my mother surfaced. She had disappeared when I was just 10. The whole town had searched for her, but she was never found. Some said she got lost in the woods, others speculated about a wild animal attack. But there were no traces, no clues. After her disappearance, I lived with my father. Her loss had hit him hard. He turned to drinking initially, but eventually pulled himself together and raised me. Life wasn't perfect, but it wasn't bad either. I often missed my mother, especially when my father sent me to stay with my grandfather during the summers. Those days weren't pleasant. My grandfather barely spoke to me, leaving me to my own devices in his city house. He owned another house, somewhere outside the city, but I had never been there. Lost in these reflections, a couple of hours slipped by. We crossed the state line and were soon approaching the city where my grandfather lived. Finally, we reached our destination, a small, close-knit town where gossip traveled faster than the wind. The town had a quintessential American provincial charm, with its main street lined with a blend of old brick buildings and a few modern establishments. A sense of community pervaded the air, but beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, as if the town was holding its breath, waiting for something. We decided to grab lunch at a local diner, a typical American eatery that reminded me of the one from Pulp Fiction. A couple of motorcycles and a few cars were parked out front. We stepped out of the truck and entered the café. The bell above the door jingled, announcing our arrival. We chose a booth near the window, and soon, a middle-aged waitress approached us. She wore a charming apron and a friendly smile. Her name tag read, Becky. She handed us the menus with a warm smile. I ordered toast and coffee, while John opted for an omelet. As Becky was about to leave, John inquired, "Could you tell us how to get to Mr. Fletcher's country house?" Becky's eyes lit up. "Oh, are you invited to his event? Let me show you." She pulled out her smartphone and pointed out the location on a map. "It's just a half-hour drive from here. I envy you. Mr. Fletcher is quite a figure in our town. The city's elite will surely be there. How are you related to him?" John blurted out, "He's his grandson," pointing at me. "Really? Your grandfather is a great man. He renovated our local shelter with his own money and makes generous donations to the city treasury. In winter, he dresses up as Santa and visits poor families. He does a lot of good. Be prude, young man." I scratched my nose, feeling a mix of embarrassment and uncertainty, and nodded. At that moment, 2 police officers walked in. The first was about 45, with graying hair, of medium height and a pleasant face. The second was younger, around 30, with chestnut curls and a freckled face. Becky greeted them warmly. "Hello, Becky. The usual for us," said the older officer. "What's with the long faces? Something happened?" Becky asked. "Yeah, people are disappearing in the neighboring towns. The sheriff's called, asked for help in the search. Thankfully, it's calm here." My ears perked up. "That's terrible. How many have gone missing?" "I heard it started just a week ago," Becky said. "People have been disappearing for a while. But this time, 10 elderly people vanished all at once," the sheriff replied, setting his hat on the table. "Something bad is happening. I can feel it." Becky shook her head in fear and went to place our order. John and I exchanged a glance, and he whispered, "I don't get it. You told me your grandpa was a nasty old man. How come everyone speaks so highly of him?" I didn't answer. It was one of the reasons I disliked my grandfather. Only his assistant and I knew his true nature. He was always cordial with others, but as soon as they left, his mask would drop, revealing a sullen, malevolent face. It was a terrifying sight, and he never hid this side of himself from me. We finished our meal and headed towards the destination. The drive was uneventful, the town passing by in a blur of typicality. Soon, we arrived at the place. As we approached the house, several cars were already parked in front. We found a spot and stepped out, taking in the sight before us. John whistled in awe. It was a massive 3-story mansion, surrounded by a perfectly manicured lawn and an array of small shrubs. We stood for a moment, admiring the grandeur, then walked towards the front door. Before we could knock, the door swung open. A woman in her 40s stood in the doorway, dressed in a black, gray, and white dress. Her features were harsh, almost malevolent, and her hair, not too long, was tied neatly in a bun. It was Miss Olson, my grandfather's manager and assistant. I didn't know how long she had been with him, but she was already there when I visited as a child. Her stern face, even back then, was one reason I preferred her over my grandfather. She never hid her disdain for others. "You've grown, David, but not for the better," she said bluntly, then turned to John. "And who's this punk? He wasn't invited." "He's John, my friend, a +1, I said with a smile, looking at my stunned friend. Miss Olson scrutinized us silently for a moment, then turned and led us inside. The entry hall was richly decorated, with paintings adorning the walls and expensive vases in the corners. John looked around excitedly, elbowing me and whispering how I had hit the jackpot. We were shown to 2 adjacent rooms. Entering mine, I found a bedroom with a bed and bedside tables. Across from the bed was a large dresser. "Settle in," Miss Olson instructed. "The reception starts at 6 p.m. I'll come to get you. For now, stay here." "Wait, what about meeting my grandfather?" "He's busy right now. You'll speak with him in the evening." John and I nodded in agreement. He went to his room, and I opened my suitcase, taking out an old suit inherited from my father. In the dresser, I found ironing equipment. I ironed the clothes, hung them up, and lay down on the bed, wondering what the evening would bring. Before I knew it, I drifted off to sleep. In my dream, I was 10 years old, playfully begging my mother, "Mom, let's go for a walk, please. Let's go to the forest." "No, son, it's late. We might get lost." I persisted, tugging at her long white dress, until she finally agreed. We stood at the forest's edge, and as I excitedly stepped forward, a loud knock on the door jolted me awake. "Young master, it's time. The dinner will start soon." I opened my eyes to a gray ceiling and a fancy chandelier. My heart pounded. Why did I dream of that? Was it a dream or a memory? Trying to remember gave me a terrible headache. I washed my face in the bathroom, then dressed in the suit and walked to the hall, where John, oddly elegant in his suit and bow tie, was waiting. His unfamiliar appearance made me try to smile, but my heart kept pounding wildly. We descended to the main hall, where a crowd had already gathered. Not recognizing anyone, we simply nodded in greeting to those passing by. Miss Olson had already left on her errands, leaving John and me to head towards the buffet. After nibbling on some hors d'oeuvres, I washed it all down with champagne. We stood there for a while, taking in the scene. Suddenly, the room's atmosphere shifted as my grandfather entered. I hadn't seen him in years, and the change in him was striking. His once robust and healthy face had given way to a tired, sickly appearance. But his smile remained as warm and inviting as ever. The crowd greeted him with applause and cheers, to which he responded with a humble wave, almost as if embarrassed by the attention, and made his way to the center of the room. A distinguished man in a suit, the mayor, greeted him. He began, "Dear friends, we're here to celebrate a man who is not only a respected citizen and a patron of our town, but also the most generous and kind-hearted individual among us." After a round of applause, he continued, "Let us wish him a long life. As the mayor of this town, I want to present this medal for his outstanding contributions." He opened a beautiful red box, revealing a prestigious medal, which he then pinned on my grandfather's chest. Raising his glass, he toasted, and everyone followed suit. After sipping his champagne, my grandfather scanned the crowd, his gaze landing on me. For a fleeting moment, his smile faltered, but then he quickly recovered, beckoning me over with a wave. Reluctantly, I approached, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. "In truth, I've gathered you all to share some news. I am old, and my time is short. Therefore, I'm leaving all my inheritance to my only kin, my grandson." His words left me stunned. A hesitant round of applause broke out, led by John, who gave me a thumbs up. Gradually, everyone joined in. I looked at my grandfather, bewildered. He leaned in, whispering, "We'll talk later." Then, raising his glass once more, he moved away to converse with the mayor. I returned to John, still trying to process everything. The evening proceeded with various guests approaching me with congratulations and well wishes for my grandfather. I nodded in gratitude, my eyes constantly drifting towards my grandfather, wondering what he was planning. As the night wore on, the guests began to disperse. Finally, the event concluded. My grandfather disappeared somewhere with the mayor, and Miss Olson reappeared to escort us back to our rooms. I never got the chance to speak with him. After washing up and changing, I lay in bed, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Before long, sleep overtook me, drawing me into a restless slumber. I awoke abruptly, engulfed in darkness. Have you ever experienced waking up in the dead of night, your breath heavy, your body paralyzed with fear? That's what happened to me. I lay motionless, my heart pounding, unable to turn my head to discern the source of my dread. The silence was deafening. Then, the bed creaked. Something was pressing down on my legs, slowly making its way up and settling amidst them. My heart raced with terror. I tried to sit up, to see if it was just John playing a trick, but it was too dark to see clearly. There was a shape on my legs, under the blanket, too big to be a dog. But what then? I lay back down, too scared to move, fearing any motion might provoke whatever was sharing my bed. Time passed slowly, every second stretching into eternity. Then, the creature rose. My eyes, now accustomed to the darkness, made out a gaunt, hunched silhouette. It reminded me of the aliens from that Mel Gibson movie about crop circles, thin and eerie. It moved towards the door and left. My heart still pounded. My body felt numb and unresponsive. Eventually, I managed to calm my breathing and got up quietly, deciding to check on John. The corridor was pitch black, the lights unresponsive. I grabbed my phone and used it as a flashlight. Finding the light switch did no good. The electricity seemed to be out in the entire house. I proceeded to John's room, flashlight in hand. My heart sank when I found his room empty. A dreadful feeling overtook me. Recalling the creature from my room, I feared we were in grave danger. I decided to search the house for John. Walking down the corridor, I stumbled upon a small door leading to a trash chute. I peeked inside to see a deep square shaft and quickly moved on. I opened every door along the way, finding only bedrooms and storage rooms, all empty. My search continued until I reached a door at the end of the corridor. It led to a small laundry room, shelves lined with linens and blankets along the walls. The washing machine in the center was covered in blood, with a stream of blood flowing from its door onto the floor. My hand trembled. I hesitated, sensing something atop the machine. Overcoming my terror, I slowly raised the flashlight. There it was, a grotesque figure covered in fur with long hair, a hyena-like snout, and elongated claws as long as a man's finger. Its mouth was filled with rows of sharp, small teeth. It had a long, thin tail with a tuft at the end, swaying side to side. Its eyes glowed, staring directly at me. Paralyzed with fear, I felt a blow to the back of my head, and my legs gave way beneath me. The creature was the most repulsive and terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Suddenly it snarled and coiled, ready to pounce. Reacting instinctively, I slammed the door shut just as it leaped. It crashed into the door with a thud, thrashing violently against it. I took a second to gather myself and then ran as fast as I could. My feet pounded against the cold floor as I ran, the roar and crash of the creature breaking through the door echoing behind me. I remembered the trash chute door and sprinted towards it. Desperation lent speed to my legs. Finding the door, I frantically squeezed through and tumbled into the abyss. I braced for impact, but the chute's angle changed, and I was ejected into a room. I looked around. My phone had skidded away. Crawling, I retrieved it and shone its light around. It was a basement, windowless and bare, except for the walls, scarred with deep scratches, the lair of that beast. I hurried to leave, fearing it might follow me down. Finding a door, I pulled it open. It was unlocked. Stepping into the corridor, I found myself in a catacomb-like passage with a low ceiling and narrow paths, dimly lit by red lights, left or right. A fresh breeze from the left decided for me. The corridor widened as I progressed, leading to a large, oval room. In the center stood a stone slab, stained with blood, resembling a bed. Beside it lay a chain with one end attached to the slab and the other ending in a collar. My flashlight beam revealed more horrors, a severed human finger on the floor. Panic engulfed me, my heart racing uncontrollably. Then, a distant thumping sound, thud, thud, thud. I looked around, frightened, and decided to flee. At the room's other end, I found a passage and hurried through. Soon, I stumbled upon a door leading to a surveillance room filled with screens and a control panel. The main screen showed the stone slab room, while the others displayed various rooms holding people, mostly elderly, lying apathetically in their beds. A chill ran down my spine as I spotted John in one of the rooms. What in God's name was happening? I had to rescue him and escape. I checked my phone. No signal. Deep underground, I thought. My eyes caught a set of keys hanging near the door and a pistol in a low drawer. Bingo. I grabbed both, checked the gun's safety, and tucked it behind my waistband. Leaving the room, I continued down the corridor, now lined with prison cells, each with a small barred window. The prisoners begged for rescue as they saw me. I apologized, promising to return with help. Finally, I found John, semi-conscious on a bed. As I opened the door and began to help him up, a loud thump echoed in the distance. We were too late. The creature appeared around the corner, and I hastily pulled John back into the cell, closing the door. The monster, playing with its prey, carried a human arm in its mouth, swinging in time with its strides. Saliva mixed with blood dripped from its jaws. In its hand, it held a human leg, attached to a chain and shackle, a macabre toy. It flung the leg against the walls, creating the ominous thumping. It entered the room, eyes scanning its surroundings. The prisoners fell silent, and I slid down, hiding in the shadows, panting and heart racing. I locked the door and collapsed in a corner, daring not to move. The creature's roars and the thunderous crashes outside sent shivers down my spine. As I huddled there, memories of the recent disappearances in neighboring towns invaded my thoughts. Could it be that my grandfather was behind this? Was he feeding people to this monster? The notion sent a chill through me. Suddenly, silence descended. Had the creature left? Cautiously, I crept to the small window in the door and peered out. Just inches from my face, the creature's visage appeared, its foul breath reeking of blood. Its cold eyes regarded me as if I were prey. I recoiled in horror, grateful for the locked door that held against its violent attempts to break in. Eventually, it gave up and lumbered away. My heart still pounding wildly, I gathered the courage to look again. The creature had returned to the room with the stone slab. Perhaps this was our chance to escape. I carefully helped John to his feet. He was slowly regaining consciousness. "What's happening?" he muttered groggily. "We're in deep trouble," I replied. We made our way cautiously down the opposite corridor, which narrowed into a tight passage, ending at a staircase. Hope surged as we ascended. At the top, a door stood before us. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. Despair mounted as key after key failed to turn in the lock. Finally, with trembling hands, I tried the last key. It turned with a click and the door swung open. We rushed through, finding ourselves in another corridor lined with open doors. Peeking into each room, we discovered a kitchen and a lounge area. Pressing on, just as we neared the exit, a voice stopped us cold. "Wait, young master. It's too early for you to leave," Mrs. Olson said, her voice chillingly calm. In her hands, she held a large shotgun, aimed directly at us. "Your grandfather awaits and wishes to speak with you. Please, follow me." We had no choice but to comply. We stepped out into the kitchen, a stark contrast to the horrors we had just witnessed, an ordinary kitchen. Then we were led to the grand hall and up to the second floor, where a large door loomed. Mrs. Olson knocked, and we entered. The room was a grand study, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk, behind which my grandfather sat, engrossed in a book, a cigar smoldering between his fingers. We approached the desk. He finally set aside his book and extinguished his cigar, his gaze lifting to meet ours with a look of displeasure. "So, grandson, you've seen the burden that comes with my legacy. That creature, in a way, is now part of your inheritance," he said, his voice cold. "You're insane," I shouted, my anger boiling over. "Did you lock up John to feed him to that thing? You kidnapped people to feed that monster," he replied, his voice steady. "I had no choice. As you saw, they were only the elderly. I never fed it the young." Confused and horrified, I demanded, "Why? Why keep such a thing in the basement?" Suddenly, he grew furious, his face contorting in rage. "It's all your fault," he yelled. I fell silent, struggling to comprehend his accusation. But before he could explain further, a loud noise erupted from outside the door. Mrs. Olson interjected, "Sir, the creature is loose. We must act." With a grunt, my grandfather stood and walked to a cabinet, retrieving a rifle and tranquilizer darts. He loaded the gun and stepped out, leaving Mrs. Olson with us. The cacophony outside eventually ceased, but my grandfather didn't return. Fear was etched on John's face. What to do next? Mrs. Olson had gone to check the situation, and when she didn't return, unease gripped me. I decided to investigate. Cautiously, I opened the door and peered outside. The corridor was deserted. Then, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. Mrs. Olson's voice, filled with desperation and terror. Without a second thought, I rushed towards the screams, pistol drawn. John followed close behind. I sprinted into the living room, where I was met with the most horrific sight. The creature held Mrs. Olson's head in one hand and her body in the other. My legs turned to jelly. I aimed at the creature and fired. The bullet hit its arm and it dropped the body. It hurled the head at me and leaped upwards. I fired again and again. The creature ran along the walls, but another shot to its leg sent it crashing to the ground. As I prepared to finish it off, a cry from my grandfather stopped me. "Stop! Don't kill her. She's your mother." His words stunned me. My mother. A piercing headache hit, and memories flooded back. The day in the woods with my mother. We were happy until a creature attacked her. Her last words were for me to run. I found my grandfather and told him what happened. He returned with her bloodied body, blaming me for her death. Snapped back to reality by the creature lunging at me, I hesitated to shoot. John tackled us both, and we tumbled to the floor. The pistol clattered away. John grabbed it and emptied the magazine into the creature. It twitched, and then lay still. John checked me for injuries, finding none serious. We turned to my grandfather, who was bleeding and weak. He grabbed my hand and pulled me close. "I loved my daughter, but she died because of your whim. Why couldn't you just stay home?" he gasped. John slapped him. "You sick bastard! How could you blame a child? Why keep that creature here? It wasn't her anymore." My grandfather tried to respond, but his strength faded. His eyes remained open, fixed in a final gaze. I closed them gently, then called 911. Soon the police arrived. I led them to the body. Where the creature had been, now lay the body of a young woman, my mother. Her face bore an expression of relief, as if released from a lifetime of suffering. I couldn't bear the sight, turning away to vomit. John helped me up, and we explained everything to the police, leading them to the dungeon. The captives were rescued, and soon the house was swarming with police. After giving our statements, John and I were taken to the station. We were released after a day and finally headed home, leaving behind the nightmares of that house.